Welcome to Concept. This is Dr. Bill Loveless saying thank you for listening. We're glad you tuned in today, and the title of the program is When Life Hurts. And that's pretty much all of us. All of us have had opportunities to hurt, and all of us have had things happen to us in life that hurt. We're going to divide it today into kind of two parts, though. Part of the hurt we're going to talk about is hurt that normally comes to us when hurtful things happen to us. Lose a job or lose a partner, someone in the family dies, a catastrophe of one kind or another comes to us, and we hurt. Perfectly normal feeling. The other kind of hurt is a hurt that we call depression. And the World Health Organization, WHO, tells us that this is the most expensive disease in the world, and by 2030, we will have depression worldwide as the most important disease known to man, including surpassing HIV and surpassing heart attacks and heart trouble. So depression becomes a very significant part of our life. We're very much aware that we're addressing the costliest disease in the world. If you figure the treatment costs and the costs of lost productivity, we're looking at the costliest disease in the world. Now, as you look around the world, there's a lot of good things happening. Unfortunately, news broadcasts much of the time specialize in what's happening that's bad. What are you going to get? A fire in Philadelphia, or a fire in Los Angeles, or a forest fire, or a plane crash, or a murder, or something else locally and nationally and international news. The news can be bad, but the news also can be very good. Unfortunately, news people don't seem to report the good stuff as much as the bad stuff because it's not, quote, newsworthy. There are a lot of wonderful people volunteering to help others. There are people giving large amounts of time and money to help other people. There are all kinds of good impulses in the world taking place. Sometimes these get reported. I understand that, and I'm happy for that. And this program and this station does report a lot of good stuff because there is a lot of good stuff happening. In fact, Concept takes the point that the important part of life is to emphasize what works and what is good. There has been an eternal struggle going on between good and evil since the beginning of time. And the struggle will continue until the end of time. And that struggle is between the forces of evil and the forces of good. And Concept takes the position that the forces of evil will be victimized, and the forces of good will be the victor. And we know that's going to happen. We look forward to that happening. And we know that in spite of what we see around us in the world, the good will triumph. So we have these forces struggling. When we talk about depression, and we're addressing not feeling bad because something happened to us suddenly or inadvertently in life, but we're talking about the situation where the disease of depression is very much with us. So let's take a look now at what we can experience physically when we talk about depression. Sleep disturbance. Now, just because you can't go to sleep doesn't mean you're depressed. But people who are depressed oftentimes say they can't sleep well. Appetite disturbance, eating too much or not eating enough. Again, having that happen to you doesn't mean you're depressed. But depressed people usually do have appetite and disturbances. Loss of sex drive, same thing I would say for the others. Fatigue and decreasing energy. Again, fatigue and decreasing energy don't necessarily mean you're depressed. On the other hand, many depressed people who have the disease of depression, if there is such a disease, and that's even an argument in mental health today, and family history of depression, suicide, eating disorders, and alcoholism All of these things can play a part. Is depression handed on by the family? Well, that depends a lot on who you talk to. Some say yes, some say no. I'm saying maybe, but you don't have to be victimized by that. We're going to talk about that later in the program today so that you'll have all kinds of good things to look forward to if your family seems to be a depressed family handing on the family blues from one generation to the next. There are symptoms that seem to be both psychological and biological. For instance, poor concentration, poor recent memory, the inability to recall things that have happened in the recent past, excessive concern over health, drug and alcohol addiction, and excessive emotional sensitivity. Become personally sensitive about everything that's going on around us, and pronounced mood swings. This swinging from very happy and elated to very sad and very depressed. These are some of the possible symptoms. Be very careful as we talk today that you don't diagnose yourself, because that's some of the crooked thinking that leads to depression. And we're going to talk about that later in the program today in terms of what we do about it. Let's go now to some of the causes of depression. This is an important question that all of you are wondering about. Are early life experiences a significant factor in the causes of depression? And the answer is possibly. Possibly, early life experiences can be a factor in depression. This is a failure to achieve emotional attachments. What do we mean by emotional attachments? Well, attachment theory today is a very important part of the whole understanding of human nature. And it's very important for us to understand that very early in life we form attachments to our survival figures, primarily our mother, early in our infancy. And there's a whole theory of attachment. John Bowlby in England and all of his disciples have helped us a great deal in understanding how crucial this close, attached bond to survival figures is in our life. And this does have something to do with our later in life depression. Anxiety and fear. Anxiety is afraid of being fearful, and fear is being afraid of something that happened to us or that we ought to be afraid of. But anxiety and fear travel together, and previously harsh atmosphere. This is a very important part that I want to just stop and talk about. Recently, my wife and I were waiting for dinner and actually a breakfast in a restaurant. And we saw this family with 3 small children, 3 small boys, all under the age of 10 or even maybe 7 or 8. And, and they were very normal boys, asking questions into everything. And there was a line waiting, so we watched the parents and the boys interact as they got ready to go to breakfast. And the parents were saying, stop this, don't do this, here, come and sit still, quit wiggling. I mean, it was a constant barrage of harsh atmosphere. And I looked at my wife and she looked at me and we winked and said to ourselves, we didn't say anything because these people were sitting not far from us. We said to ourselves, and then later we commented at breakfast, these young children are growing up in a very harsh atmosphere. There are a number of ways they might go. One of them they might end up, or one of them might end up with severe depression. Not necessarily. The others might be harsh themselves. There's all kinds of ways that that can play out. A lack of support for growth. What is growth? Growth is a learning process. When you're growing, you're learning new things. When you're learning new things, you're making mistakes. Hello. As I learn new things, I make mistakes. As you learn new things, you make mistakes. We're all mistake makers. But lack of support when we are criticized and undercut and maligned for making mistakes, that's called the lack of support for growth. And importantly, abuse and molestation become important causes of depression. Current events do have something to do with the onset of depression. There's no question that it can influence it. It doesn't have to cause it necessarily, but it certainly can influence. Interpersonal losses, death in the family, a loss of job, harsh events that happen to us, interpersonal losses. Friends move away. We lose friends. We lose a focus. We lose a secure anchor. These interpersonal losses definitely can contribute to depression, damage to self-esteem. When we are criticized, maligned, and ignored, and our self-esteem is threatened, we feel that we're no good anymore. And that's one of the thought patterns we're going to look at in a minute, because that's very, very important. Physical disease. There are a whole list of diseases. In the preparation I did for the program today, I looked at several books on depression, and in one of them, it was more along the lines of psychiatry. There was a long list of diseases that can contribute in a major fashion to depression. Prolonged stress over a period of time, feeling under the gun, under pressure, under distress and stress, we find ourselves. Chronic drug or alcohol abuse. And the key to regulating the experience, all of these negative experiences, listen to me carefully. The key to regulating these negative experiences is what happens is less important than the way we respond to it. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that later in the program, because that's a key problem that we need to deal with. Let's look at some of the other things that might happen psychologically to us that we may experience: sadness and despair, irritability. Just because your wife or you are irritable, or your kids, or you're irritable to your boss, or he's irritable to you, doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed. But they travel together. Loss of self-esteem, we've already talked about that. Apathy, it's just, I don't feel good for anything. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to feel anything. I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to sit here. I'm apathetic about everything. This can travel along. Interpersonal problems, getting along with other people, talking, listening. It becomes a chore. It's a real duty. We don't want to do it anymore. Guilt, feeling guilty for everything. All the things that we've supposedly done. All of these things can travel together in this depression package. Negative suicidal thoughts often travel together. We need to take these very seriously when people are talking negativity and suicide. We need to listen to them and take that very seriously and try to help with some interventions. So here are some of the things that conventional wisdom tells us about depression. We can recover but not cure depression, because it's a physically recurring disease. Not everybody agrees with this. I kind of do, and I kind of don't. It depends on a lot of other factors. To be precise, it is life that is recurrent. And no one faces loss or rejection only once. Those things do happen to us over and over again. Hurt and pain are regular visitors to all of us. I'm looking at people today in this program, and you're looking at me. I have, and you have, experienced hurt, pain on a regular basis. They're regular visitors. So we need not be surprised by that. Did you learn depression from your family? Well, maybe you did, and maybe you didn't. But the good thing is, this is one, listen to me, this is one family legacy you don't have to carry on. This is one family legacy you don't have to carry on. And we're going to talk about how that can happen as we take a look at now, what do we do? What do we do to cure depression? Number one, an informed and realistic understanding of what we're dealing with. That's what we've been dealing with for the first half of this program, actually. What is it? What are some of the symptoms? What are some of the causes and feelings? So we have to have an informed and realistic understanding of what we're dealing with. Don't be afraid to seek help. Seek professional help, psychiatry, psychology, counseling. All your minister, if he's trained particularly in counseling, all of this can be very, very helpful. An informed treatment based on what we know works in most cases. In other words, an informed treatment program on the basis of what we know what works. Well, how do we know what works? Hey, listen, hang around. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And last, integration of psychotherapeutic and pharmacological treatment. I think it is important for therapy and pharmacy to travel together. There's a real problem today being debated in the scientific literature about the pharmacological treatment of depression. But there's no question that the right kind of pills, medicine, therapy can be helpful, combined particularly with psychotherapeutic help. This is a very powerful combination. Now, the current models of treatment go something like this. We call it the psychodynamic. Let's look at your childhood. Let's look at your unhappy past. Let's look at the factors that have made you depressed. The psychodynamic is helpful in some cases, generally not that helpful, and it takes a long time and a lot of money. The cognitive, that's the interesting kind of model that has come strong today, which basically says, if you want to feel better, think better. Thinking and feeling travel together. We can't separate thinking and feeling. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very well-tested model today and being done very successfully all over the world and certainly in the United States, is a way to look. There's another way that's closely related to it, which is behavioral cognitive therapy, which says actions and reactions have consequences. In other words, how you feel and what you do have consequences. This is a very important principle to keep in mind. And the last one is interpersonal. Good relationships are essential for good mental health. Now, I happen to feel that the three, the cognitive, the behavioral, and the interpersonal, are very successful ways of dealing with depression. Depression can be dealt with, combining it with the psychotherapeutic medication. This is the way to go. We need help with our thinking. We need help with our actions. We need good relationships with each other and with ourselves in order to get over depression. Recently, I had someone come to my office and say, Dr. Loveless, I'm looking for a therapist that can make me feel good. And I looked at him and said, well, I don't blame you. Everybody's looking for a therapist that can help them feel good or make them feel good. But generally speaking, we feel better when we do better. Doing good and feeling good kind of travel together. So we have to think about our feelings. We have to behave in such a way as we have good relationships with ourselves and with each other. And in that sense, we're going to be a whole lot better off. There are some gateways, some ways of thinking that have directly to do with depression. And one of them is called personalizing, taking interpersonal things, often negative, personally. Oh my goodness, I did something wrong here. It's going to be that way. Everybody thinks I'm bad. This is a negative attribution. No, not everybody thinks you're bad. This is not true any time in the world. Certainly not true of you if you were thinking about this about yourself. So you've done something silly, you've done something stupid, you've done something wrong. Don't personalize that. Don't attribute that with a negative attribution by saying, they'll always feel that way. This is who I am. This is a definition of me. No, it's not a definition of you. That is the kind of thinking we want to help you change so that you do away with this personalizing and taking it personally and then saying, this is the inflexible point of view. And this is the second crooked thinking way that I want you to look at. Inflexible point of view is, he's always puts me down, I'm stuck forever. There's no way I can possibly ever get out of this. I'm stuck forever. I'm no good forever. I'm guilty forever. I'm depressed forever. No. Again, that's the crooked thinking that the cognitive behavioral approach tries to help people get rid of. Just because you do something once doesn't mean you're ever stuck doing it forever. You don't have to personalize. You don't have to take the inflexible point of view. And the third one is called the global specifics. Today's experience affects everything that happens to me. I'll never be happy again. Oh dear. So we take a look at these. These are the basic tools that those of us who are trying to help people feel better really try to help people understand. So, something affected you today. Don't ever come to the conclusion, I'll never be happy again. That is absolutely wrong, crooked thinking. And remember, if we want to change the way we feel, we have to change the way we think. And we have to change the way we do. So personalizing negativity, inflexible point of view, this will always be this way, and global specifics, this is affecting everything I do. We need to think straight. These are crooked ways of thinking. There are some possible attributions when hard times hit. We need to take on the concept, hey, so hard times hit me. It isn't me necessarily. It's not always going to be this way. I just went through that one with you in some detail, and this doesn't necessarily affect all that I do. In other words, these are very positive attributions. I just gave you the negative attributions, now the positive Now, we want to say, let's be realistic. We're not saying pessimistic and we're not saying optimistic. We're saying realistic. And realistic is, it isn't me necessarily. It's not always going to be this way. And this doesn't necessarily affect all of life that I do. Now let's look at the antidepressant family. You can be an antidepressant family. Number one, if there's depression around, take prompt action. Get help. See a counselor, see a psychiatrist, see your family physician. Talk about the symptoms. They may be the wrong attributions, you may be negatively attributing to them, and it may not nearly be all that bad. Listen non-judgmentally, like these parents I described earlier in the program. Encourage self-care. What is self-care? Taking better care of yourself. That's what we mean by self-care. Taking the positive side. Taking the side, hey, this is not going to be this way forever. This is not the way I am. This is a temporary thing. Encourage self-care. Accept what works. Try to grow what works instead of specializing in what's broken. Use positive communication, affirmative communication. Stroke people. Plan frequent social contacts. See your friends. Be with the people you love. This is the way you and your family, your kids, have their friends home. Give them positive strokes. Give their friends positive strokes. Make it a place where everybody likes to be, because we're encouraging personal responsibility. Remember, it's your responsibility to take charge of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And you can do that. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a few moments. And encourage activity. Be active. It's important for us to get out of the chair, turn off the television set, turn off the computer, get outside, see the beauty, hike in the mountains, take 5-mile trips from where you live and see what interesting things there are to see. Get activity going, and most of all, have fun. What is fun for you? Well, what is fun for you may not be fun for me, but find out what is fun for you and find yourself doing that. So take prompt action. Listen non-judgmentally. No judgment. No opinion. Oh, that's interesting. I'm happy to hear you say that. Encourage self-care. Think positively. Take better care of yourself. Use positive communication whenever you can, particularly with the children, but with the adults as well. Plan frequent social contact. Encourage personal responsibility. Encourage